Hi, it's Miss Lisa from the St. Paris Public Library. Welcome back to our chapter book reading just before bed. This is night number 4, and we are reading the chapter book Guardians of Ga'Hoole, The Rise of a Legend. Chapter 14, Ice Squires. When our intensive training period began, our first class was scheduled before tweener. They thought the cadets learned better when hungry. The classes were larger than the beginner courses and more owls than before. Some we had not yet met, as they had been brought in from a sub-camp on the small island of Darkfowl, where they had completed their preliminary training week. I was ordered to report to the Ice Squires, commanded by a pompous old short-eared owl, Captain Ludvigsen Osseo Flammius. Just to give you the flavor of the old hoot, here's how he introduced himself. I am Captain Ludvius Ossius Flammus V. My father, my grandfather, great-grandfather, and great-great-grandfather all served at this academy after distinguished careers in the Ice Squires unit, one of the oldest units in the Killian League. As you may know, the Ice Squires fight with both hot and cold weapons. Although not fire claws, of course, it might also interest you to know that my family's name, Ludvigsen, is taken from the other. A certain Ekrik Ludvigsen Pontopotodon, who first identified our species. It is a name I carry with deep pride. Weird, whispered a whiskered Screech, who perched beside me on the rocks where we had assembled. I also wondered why someone would be proud to be named after an other, and began to say, my sentiments but the words caught in my throat as I turned to her. She was the loveliest whiskered Screech I had ever seen. Did you have something to say, Cadet Lies Megascops? The captain added, and this, unfortunately, is where my history caught up with me. Nothing, sir, I replied crispy and gave the required salute. Tell me, were you as vociferous in the attack on Stormfast? Were you supposedly distinguished yourself? No, sir, it was very hard to breathe for all the smoke. Well, why don't you inhale all your hot air now and cease speaking? He barked. Sir, it was the lovely Screech next to me. She had raised her starboard talon. Yes, Cadet Lilium Megascops, you have something to say? Indeed, sir. It was I who initiated the conversation with Cadet Lies Megascops. So you want to take the blame, I assume? Yes, sir, she answered. The captain folded his wings behind his back and strutted over to us. Well then, Miss Cadet, he huffed. He was about to continue, but Lilium broke in. Miss Cadet Lilium Megascops, sir. Do you have a hearing problem? No, sir, it's, she began to stammer. It's just that I have never heard a female cadet referred to as a miss. And you take issue with that? Well, sir. She was silent for several seconds, and I thought she was going to wilf, but quite the reverse. She seemed to increase in size. Yes, I do take issue. We are all serving here together, and there is no need to call attention to our gender. You could have heard the feathers drop. Not just any feather, but the finest fringe feather, a plummel. Great glocks, I thought. I had never encountered anyone like Lilium. I suggest, Miss Cadet, that along with your friend here, you inhale some of your hot air as well and shut up. The captain turned on his talons and stormed away. She flipped her head around towards me, winked, and whispered, I'd say we're off to a good start, Cadet Lies Megascops. Oh, great glocks. My gizzard went into a flutter. She wasn't frightened of that old hoot at all. Despite the rather rocky beginning, the practice went rather well, even though I could hardly concentrate due to my giddy condition over Lilium. We practiced with a variety of weapons, both of ice and metal. We learned the proper way to grip an ice weapon with our battle claws, both on and off. Luckily for us, the 2 lieutenants, both short-eared owls, did most of the real instruction, and they were quite nice. Don't let the captain get you down, said Lieutenant Artemis Osseo Flammius. He bellows about quite a bit with the new cadets. He doesn't mean much by it. I did not want to admit it, but it didn't get me down one single bit. If it hadn't been for the captain, I might never have had my encounter with Lilium. In the first training session, our instructor set up several targets with the peculiar double crescent insignia, just like the ones we had seen emblazoned on the owls' faces who had attacked us at the Ice Dagger and on Stormfast the night my sister died. There were perhaps 20 targets altogether, but only one had crossed crescents, which we're told were the badge of Bileric, the orphan maker himself. After exposure on the training field, it would not take long for this so-called symbol of sacred force to lose its mystique entirely and become about as sacred as a wet pellet. Both Lilium and I did well in the training session, which seemed to aggravate the captain. Every time Lieutenant Artemis would praise us, or Lieutenant Gymede Osseo Flammius would said how well we had executed a maneuver, the captain felt compelled to find a slight flaw in our performance. Let's not get too fanciful, Cadet Lilium Megascops, or Cadet Lies Megascops. You have an odd twist on the downstroke when you wield that blade. Is that a peculiarity that you picked up in the skirmish on Stormfast, or are you just trying to be creative? He said the word creative as if it were something profoundly shameful. No, sir, I muttered. For our next training session, unfortunately, Lilium was put in another group. This session focused on flight formation, or FF. FF was perhaps the most challenging exercise new cadets encountered. We were all used to flying and dealing with a variety of weather conditions, but we were not used to flying in formation. It was a new discipline used in warfare for purposes of mutual defense and the concentration of strike power. I had heard my parents talk about it, and I knew their positions in the number of different formations, but no one ever called the formations out loud. All commands were expressed non-verbally through wing signals, so the flying units could operate in total silence. Therefore, our first lesson was to learn what we called the WWS, the wing waggle signals, for a variety of maneuvers. There were perhaps 24 or more aerobatic maneuvers that had to be mastered for flying in formation, and so there was a lot of code to learn. We began with the signals for the 5 basic formations: the retract and roll, the vertical break, the crossover break, the flat pass, and the tail slide. It was after midnight before they actually let us take flight and practice giving the signals and performing the first couple of maneuvers. "Oh, sorry, old fellow," said the great horned owl, Cadet Skellig Bubo, as he bumped into me. "I'm about as graceful as a puffin with its wings gone cattywampus." I had to laugh. Cadet Skellig came from a somewhat aristocratic family that lived in the Firthkin far up in the Firth of Fangs. Skellig spoke very properly with the cultivated accent of the owls from that Firthkin, but he was not at all stuffy or grand or self-important like Captain Ludvigsen Osseo Flammius. He had a terrific sense of humor. Indeed, he was the one who came up with the nickname for the captain, Lud Dude, which, at the time, we all thought was hysterically funny. We did not have the most sophisticated senses of humor. Cadet Skellig seemed somewhat older than his years and was rather small. His flight skills were not promising, but he did try hard. Blix and Loki had told me that cadets from his Firthkin were usually admitted to the academy because of their distinguished ancestry. What he lacked in skill, he more than made up for with his sense of humor and good spirits. Everyone liked Cadet Skellig Bubo. He was elected as our barracks sergeant, which meant that he had to make sure we kept our personal hollows neat. There was no nest-made snakes in the barracks. He even helped us clean if our hollows got messy. After Twix time, no one was supposed to leave the barracks, but he never reported the many who snuck out to visit the grog trees. I did myself a few times. I didn't drink the highly potent bingle juice, but it was fascinating to listen to the soldiers back from the front with their combat stories. The grog tree offered an education apart from our formal training that was very valuable. While we were doing our drills for formation flights over the training field, I caught sight of Blix and a dozen or so northwestern seaweeds, pygmies, and elf owls practicing with ice splinters. Our flight formation instructor pointed them out. A Frostbeak unit is training below us, he announced. Targets had been set up on the ground, and the small owls were zooming in with their launch sticks, loaded with the ice splinters. Few of them were hitting their marks. It takes a great deal of practice, our instructor, a brownfish owl named Colonel Salzin Kutupa Xylonesus, explained as we made a flat pass over the field. The launching stick is difficult to manipulate and requires a great deal of practice. You need to find the proper grip, and there's a rhythm to it. May I ask a question, Colonel, sir? Certainly, Cadet Lies. How many ice splinters does a launcher hold? Good question. Just 2. Then it's back to the field quartermaster. Orf is working on a launcher with a larger capacity, but of course that has to be balanced out against the very slight weight of the small owls best suited to the weapons. Yes, Colonel, sir, I replied. Thank you. I have to admit something troubled me about this explanation. It wasn't a larger launcher that was needed, but a better system for resupplying mid-flight. And if it was a question of merely larger launchers, why couldn't bigger owls be trained to fight with ice splinters? Ice splinters were very effective weapons, very deadly. Why were pygmies, elf, and northern sawwheat owls the only ones who could be trained with them? I looked down at the owls below us as we made our second flat pass. Blix was doing quite well. I nearly hadn't recognized her because of all the Frostbeaks wore protective goggles around the blue ice, as Orf had the first time I'd met him. Our first day of training went until almost Twix time. We were starving when we got to the dining hollow. I searched for Lil and finally found her at the nestmate tables, standing at a spotted azure black Killian who reminded me of Hoke of Hawk. I hadn't thought about Hoke or Gilda since I'd arrived, but now they came to mind again. They were 2 of the smartest snakes I'd ever met, and it seemed ridiculous to me that snakes were being used, I might even say misused, as dining tables. They had more to contribute. I was bucking tradition, but I knew it was right. This particular Killian snake was sound asleep. I turned to Lilium. Did it ever strike you that perhaps Killian snakes could be more than just a surface to eat from, or honers in the honing pit, Lilium? Just call me Lil, please. She blinked prettily, and I felt a little riffle in my gizzard. What would you propose, old fellow? said Cadet Skelling. Want them to be flight instructors? Lil chortled softly, then spoke. Well, they don't have wings, but their heads are very strong. They did hollow out our barracks, after all. No brains, my dear, Skellig laughed. No brains at all. Shush, Lil said. She can hear you. Skellig brushed her off. She's sound asleep. You can't wake her up. He took a talon and dragged it across the snake's scales. Don't do that, Lil nearly spat. Don't fret. She didn't budge. These old gals have tough hides, Skellig said. It's disrespectful, I said rather sharply. Sorry, old fellow, but I don't think respect is the point. I was aghast at this remark. Suddenly, I didn't like Cadet Skellig calling me old fellow any more. How could such a good-natured owl suddenly seem so ill-mannered, so cynical? It's exactly the point, I countered. We should respect Killian snakes. The snakes could do a lot more than we ask them to. Oh dear, Skellig said, suddenly contrite. Look, I'm sorry, really. I had a bad experience as an owlet with a Killian snake. You did? Thora said. She was sitting at the tail end of the snake and had been silent until this point. Yes, it was really awful, quite horrendous. She stabbed me with her fangs. Great glocks, Lil said. Indeed. Here's the wound. Skellig lifted his starboard wing, and just there, where it joined the upper part of his body, there was a bare patch with a ragged scar. It's healed now, but it was touch and go for a while. She was a mad old thing, but still. He paused. It was stupid of me to bring my personal experience to the table. He stroked the nestmaid rather gently with his wing-tip. She slept on. Chapter 15. What Thora Saw. I have to admit that I found Skellig's apology, well, touching, for lack of a better word, and sincere. Apparently, Thora was not so quick to forgive. She returned to the barracks after our twixt-time repast, troubled not just so much by Skellig's harsh words, but by the wound beneath his starboard wing. It was not a wound made by snake fangs. Of this, she told me later, she was certain. The puckered skin bore all the marks of a siege blade, one of the most difficult of all blades to forge. Where would a young owl like Skellig have encountered such a blade? He was a cadet. He had seen no action. When Cadet Skellig snuck out in late morning to the grog trees, Thora decided to follow him. She would be discreet and lag a good way behind him. There were some puffy clouds overhead that would provide camouflage for her if necessary. She knew Skellig was not a particularly skillful flyer, so she had no fear of keeping up with him. But Thora blinked, because as soon as Skellig was out of the barracks, he went into a beautiful steep banking turn and headed for the isolated cliffs at the far end of Dark Fowl, a place known for its tumultuous winds. He laid on the speed, negotiating the turbulence with a grace she had never seen before from him. Thora began to feel a kind of blackening dread in her gizzard. Cumulus clouds were building up just south of the point. She decided to bury herself in them and listen. Skellig's flying was still not as silent as most, perhaps because of his wound, so she could track him fairly easily. Soon she picked up another sound, quite distinct. From the whisper of the wind passing over its plummels, she could tell there was a pygmy owl in the cloud bank as well. She heard a faint chirr when the two of them met up, and then the pygmy turned and flew straight out to sea. Cadet Skellig curved around in a flight path, Thora guessed, towards the grog tree favored by Orf. Listening carefully, Thora could tell that there was something different in Cadet Skellig's flight. He was flying heavier. Was he carrying a weapon? But no, it didn't sound that heavy. A bodkin of some sort? Thora tipped her head and contracted her facial disc to home in on the sound. From the way the wind whistled against it, Thora could tell the object Skellig was carrying was not made from metal. It seemed instead to be made from something soft and slightly furry. Moleskins were often used by field medics for transporting powders and unguents for wounds. It must be a moleskin. But if Cadet Skellig needed medicine for his wound, which looked well healed, why wouldn't he just go to the Academy Infirmary? All this was becoming more and more mysterious, and Thora was determined to find out what was happening. It was still quite early. Owls tended to rest up a bit before hitting the grog trees, and Orf in particular had quite a bit of work to do to dampen his forge at the end of the night. He was meticulous about his tools, and he always started a load of cold coals brazing in the moss-lined ice cubbies before he left. Thora hid herself in the snow-laden boughs of a bushy spruce tree and watched Skellig landing in the grog tree a short distance away. As she suspected, the grog tree wasn't open for business yet. Tin cups hung on the pegs unattended. Each smith had their own cup with their mark inscribed on it. Thora watched carefully as Skellig approached the branch with the cups, but couldn't see what he was doing. Something didn't feel right to her, not at all. The grog keeper finally appeared. "Well, ain't you the early bird, cadet?" "I like to be here when the troops arrive," Skellig said. "I learn more from them than I do in any class." "Probably right. Now, what'll it be, Bingle or Bangle?" "Oh, Bangle. Like to be able to think straight, you know." "Got a lot to think about, eh?" Skellig suddenly looked a bit nervous, as if he had said too much. "Not really, but I like to be alert for the stories. Here you go." The grog keeper set up a cup of Bangle juice. By this time, a few more owls had shown up. There were 2 smiths from Down Island, and then 3 battle-weary burrow owls back from the front, one with a patch over his eye. "A double-strength Bingle shot will help you with that," the keeper said, nodding at the owl with the eye patch. 2 enormous eagle owls arrived and perched a bit away from the others. Skellig looked around as if expecting someone, but seemed to assiduously avoid the gaze of the eagle owls. "Hail, Orf!" the keeper hooted, and a hooray went up in the tree. "Here at last," said a barn owl, though one might not have guessed his species, for his white, heart-shaped face was so streaked with soot it looked nearly black. "I was wrestling with cold fire and cold coals. Takes a while, but it's the season, as you know," Orf ordered. "You brazing it already?" the barn owl asked. Yeah, the best time is when the weather starts to change. The dampness locks in the chill." He sighed and leaned forward on his perch towards the keep. "Gimme a bingle with a touch of bangle, Joby. Need to start off with a bit of the soft stuff." "Coming right up, sir." Thora couldn't take her eyes off Orf. She worshipped the smith. In her mind, he was more than a blacksmith, more than a weapons monger. He was an artist. Everything he did seemed artistic to Thora. The way he wielded his hammer, the way he held his tongs, even the way he sipped his juice was special, interesting. It wasn't long before the grog tree was crowded. A gad feather arrived and began to sing a bawdy song. "Me and my mate, we got a date at the old grog tree tonight. She used to drink bangle, but I got her to bingle, and you know what happened then. For I drank the bingle, and now I ain't single, so let's drink and drink again. I got my cup hanging in the old grog tree, she's got her cup right beside me. We'll bingle and bangle and jangle and jingle, then I'll fly into the night with my heart's delight. And come the morn, back to the tree again, where our cups await and we've got a date. We'll start all over again." The song got bawdier with tickle me tail feathers, then romantic, got a lot of love in this old gizzard. Then the old owl sang a rousing fight song. "Hail, hail, warriors valiant, we'll conquer them yet. With our banners flying, we'll pursue them to their deaths, for we are warriors of Kiel. We don't give in, we don't give up. We fight to the end and never bend. Now let's raise a cup." Thora saw Orf lift a talon to his brow as if he were tired and perhaps suffering from a headache. She was downwind of the tree slightly and tipped her head so she could better pick up what he was saying to the keeper. "Feeling poorly, Orf?" the keeper asked. "Bit of a headache. Often happens this time of year when I'm brazing the cold coals. The fumes, you know. Think I'll be toddling off." It looked more like toddling to Thora than actual flying. Orf flew only a short distance before settling down and trying to get lift again. Thora noticed that he was heading in the opposite direction of his forge, as if he was completely disoriented. She was about to fly out from her spot in the boughs of the fir tree to see if he needed help, when she saw that the 2 eagle owls had flipped their heads around and were following Orf's progress. There was a lot of boisterous singing and tumult in the tree by this time, and no one noticed the eagle owls leaving with Skellig. Thora felt dread building in her gizzard. She knew that Orf was in danger, but the 2 immense eagle owls were not birds to trifle with. They were at least twice her size and 3 times her wingspan, the perfect wingspan for, oh, great glocks, it suddenly dawned on her, they were planning a transport vacuum. 2 more eagle owls materialized out of a heavily boughed fir tree, just like the one she had been hiding in. Should she scream, sound an alarm? The owls in the grog tree were too far into the bingle juice to do anything. Should she go back and fetch the others? Lies, moss? It was too far, and in the opposite direction. Orf would be gone by then. Thora made a quick decision. She would have to track the eagle owls. When she knew where they had taken Orf, she could report back and get help. She was sure they would not kill Orf. His knowledge was too valuable. His cold coals and the ice weapons were superior to anything existing in the northern kingdoms. Those weapons alone were responsible for more deaths on the battlefield than any other. Of course, the Ice Talon League wanted Orf. They would force him to make his cold weapons and hot ones as well, the fizz blisters and flails and ice daggers. Then it struck Thora. All the time she went to observe Orf working at his forge, who was always there? Cadet Skellig. And this wasn't the first time she had seen Skellig in the grog tree, favored by Orf. She had assumed that Skellig was interested in smithing just like herself, but she remembered Skellig questioning Orf carefully about when the season for the cold coals would start. Now she knew it was because Skellig wanted to know when to nab him. Skellig must have put a potion in Orf's cup. That accounted for Orf's staggering flight from the grog tree. It was no headache from braising cold coals. They had drugged him. The weather had turned dirty. Clouds rolled in from the north and the day darkened. There was a mixture of snow, sleet, and hail, perfect weather for making cold coals. The dense cloud cover provided good camouflage for Thora, but she began to worry. She could clearly hear the eagle owls talking, but the sound of Orf's breathing, his heart, and the gurgles of his gizzard were growing dimmer and dimmer. Had they given him too much of the drug? Was Orf dying? Chapter 16. A strategy is planned. What are you saying? I asked Thora as she shook me awake. Moss heard her and began to rouse himself. It's high noon, for Glock's sake. What are you doing up at this hour? Have you been drinking the bingle or something? No, come out of the barracks. I have to tell you something privately. Grumbling, Moss and I followed Thora outside. What is it? Moss said grouchily. This was one owl who did not like to be wakened. Orf, they've owl-napped him, she said quietly. Our beaks dropped open. There was dead silence. We've got to tell someone, I said. We better alert the regiment commander. No, Thora said sharply. Why not? Moss asked. There were 3 other owls, eagle owls, like the ones that took him, circling around the academy headquarters and the Parliament Hollow, well camouflaged since the weather stinks. She tipped her head up at the dark thunderheads hammering across the sky. Hag clouds, we called them. Lightning forked from them like gnarled talons of a hag's field. Seagulls clattered into the sky, seeking refuge from the tumultuous sea. They know, Thora continued with her head tipped toward the sky. The owls know that when it's discovered that Orf is missing, an all-out search will be launched. A squadron. Thor looked at me. Those eagle owls are the Parliament. Over the Parliament will report it immediately. A squadron isn't right for this. It's too unwieldy, I said. In my short time at the academy, I had learned a thing or two. The one thing that the academy lacked, indeed the whole Killian League lacked, were units that what I thought of as extreme maneuverability. We were fighting an old war, and a century-long war, with old tactics. We needed new strategies. We needed them fast, like now. If just a few of us went, we could slip in unnoticed, as a squadron never could. Thora nodded at this. Let's claw up. Lil, we need her, I said. There's nobody better than with a hot lance than Lil. They knew I was right. Lil had become a fantastic lancer. It was as if Lil was out to prove to Lude Dude that she was no missy when it came to fighting. She had exhibited such skill that she had won the coveted retractable hot lance in the full shine games that were held when the moon was at its brightest. She'll bring Miss Hot Point, Moss exclaimed. They had all been shocked when Lil had given her hot lance this old nickname. Lil had a wicked sense of humor, and it was her way of getting back at Lude Dude and showing him just what a Miss Cadet could do with the right weapon in her talons. The owls who had nabbed Orf had taken him to Ellesmere Island, an exceedingly clever move because it was the home of the Gloxian sisters, a non-violent meditative order that had taken vows of silence. The one exception to their rule of silence was in treating the sick and wounded. Then they could speak. They were renowned for their skills in the healing arts. The sisters were so peaceful that they didn't hunt. They existed on little more than kelp and any creatures caught in the seaweed. Snails and bivalves, such as clams and oysters, were fine for them, for they had no blood. Thora said the eagle owls and Skellig had taken Orf to the cliffs on the opposite side of the island from where the sisters lived, about as far from their retreat as possible. And even if the sisters had known that the Ice Talon operatives had nabbed the greatest blacksmith in the northern kingdoms, what would they have been able to say? The sisters didn't believe in war or weapons. They had stayed neutral throughout the 100-year history of this war and welcomed all owls to their infirmary for treatment, no matter what side they were on. Our fear was that Ellmere Island was an interim stop for the treacherous owls. They would undoubtedly move on, skirting the northernmost coast of the southern kingdoms, and then head straight for the heart of Ice Talon's League territory. As we approached the island, Lil turned to me. Her eyes glowed such a bright gold in the full sun of the day that I felt a shiver pass through my gizzard. Was this love? I couldn't think of such things now. You realize what's at stake here, Lil began. If we fail, we'll all be decommed and thrown out of the academy. But more important, the war will be over. The Ice Talons League will win. They're already stronger than we are, and with Orph, they'll have all the best weapons too. I knew this, and I had but one thought. We cannot fail.